Okay, hello everyone and welcome to BrainMap. This seminar series is co-sponsored by the P41 funded Center for Mesoscale Mapping housed in the Martinos Center. It's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Stefan Skare. Dr. Skare has worked in research and development for brain MRI since 1995 at Karolinska University Hospital, with a 6-year gap at Stanford University. He received his PhD in 2002 and full professorship in 2022. His main research focus has been the development of new pulse sequences and correction methods for brain MRI. I would just like to remind the audience to please address any question you have using the Q&A box or raise your hand. Dr. Skare, thank you so much for coming here today. The virtual stage is all yours.
Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. I'm going to talk about what we are doing in my group at Karolinska University Hospital. So we are a group of 6 people. I'm going to show in a sec, and but first I'm going to introduce myself. So this is me. I already got that already introduced actually, and I'm going to maybe just say here that I'm an MR physicist, and I've been working with pulse programming of the
Stefan,
MR scanner.
I'm sorry to bother. Oh, now we see the slide. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm an MR physicist working with pulse programming. In our case, it's a G systems since '95, and this is our group. So we have a group of 6 people, and we are focusing on basically writing software for acquisition software, that is pulse sequences for the MR scanner, and reconstruction software for various applications. So our group is located at the clinical site where we scan patients. So the distance from our office spaces to the patients is like about 10 meters. So we have a very tight sort of feedback loop. What we do, how it's used, and so on from radiologists and so on. Since I've been programming a long time, know how hard it can be to use the vendor's pulse programming environment to modify an image technique to your needs. So in 2016 or 16, we decided to try to simplify the way to write software for the GMR system. So down here you can see, and we all know we have different types of acquisition techniques for MRI. If you want to make it very simple, you can divide it into 3 groups. One is GrainDeco family, one is Paspineco or Turbospineco family, and the last could be EPI family. And there is more, but if you make it simple, we can group them like that. And these bar charts are not super, I mean, they're rough estimate of how many lines of code the product has versus our code. So this is just to show that the software we have written is much easier in terms of scope, and it more or less can do the same thing. And this slide, or this map of the Earth or the world, is showing dots where we have people are using our software. So this is sort of our hope with writing a framework like this for pulse programming is to have more people collaborating, and also to make it easier for new students to get started for their projects. So we already know that MRI is a slow modality, and we have long waiting times for an exam slot. And there's also some reluctance to refer to an MRI. If you are a doctor and you have a patient and maybe you want to refer it to a quicker CT scan instead, because MRI has always been viewed as a bit of a luxury. That is starting to go away, but it's still, MRI is still a bit hard to get the referral to sometimes. Another issue with MRI is that the scan times are long. We take roughly for brain MRI, could be half an hour, which could vary a lot because we need to scan multiple scans in one exam. So, and we also know that each scan takes several minutes. And for brain, if you want to make it simple, this is very different now from how most research would view sort of what they want to do for research. Most or many MRI researchers that are doing method development are interested in mapping techniques, maybe like fingerprinting or something like that. But still in clinical care, where we work, the weighted contrasts are the workhorse for diagnosis for patients. So we have T1 flare sequences for finding tumors. We have the T2, like for finding fluid, have high signal for fluid. We have T2 flare for basically finding everything that is not normal, but most not the least inflammation. And T2 star for use for fMRI and for researchers mostly, but for in the clinical care we use it for bleeding detection. And lastly, diffusion weighted imaging, the images for stroke or abscess, finding those lesions. So this is an important portfolio, a minimum portfolio, I would say, for a patient undergoing brain MRI. So what we want to do in this presentation, I'm going to talk about two ways to address these things. One is ultra-fast brain MRI, and the other one is real-time motion correction. So the first approach is to go ultra-fast, is to attempt to acquire these big five contrasts, these important MRI contrasts, in a very short time. So we have developed EPIMix and recently NeuroMix, which have taken the scan time down to, for EPIMix, a bit over a minute, and for NeuroMix, 2.5 minutes. Approach two is that we realize that sometimes it's not enough to have these very fast techniques. Sometimes there is a need for high resolution MRI, but if we have the case of a patient that cannot be still, that is not feasible. So we have also tried to attempt to use real-time or prospective motion correction methods for the brain to let our slices or our field of view to follow the head in real time. And to the left, you see just this reminder of that an MRI takes a long time. And at the bottom left, you see our desire to avoid general anesthesia. And that is mostly for the pediatric population. If you start with EPIMix, so we invented that in 2018, so 4 years now, and we got a lot of media coverage there for a while. And we also have written a few papers on it, where the left is the technical paper we wrote, and then we follow that up with a few sort of diagnostic performance papers, basically. See how well can you figure out the diagnosis of a patient compared to conventional MRI images that also scan at the same time. So here's how these images can look. As you see, they are noisier and slightly lower resolution than the image I showed before on the big five side. But yet you can still see pathology here. And here I'm showing the test we did to see how many volunteers can we put in an MRI scanner in an hour. As you see here, the bed is going in and out, and we change the volunteer while the bed is still in motion. And we did a new exam and register. So we did register a new exam, and we also cleaned the mattress between every sort of fake patient here or volunteer. This is obviously just for showing the extreme, and there's no way that the patient will accept this. But it shows you, and this is just a chart now of 30 volunteers that we were able to scan within 1 hour. And you can see one slice here only, and you see all the 6 contrasts. Where the last row, ADC, is the log ratio of the T2 and the GWI. But the important message here is not that it's only cool to do 30 volunteers per hour. the important is that you can see where the limits are. If you think of 30 volunteers per hour, that is 1 minute of scanning and about 1 minute of changing or swapping patients. In reality, you can think of if you would rely on an EPIMix, a single brain exam, for a 1 minute scan, and you would still need like 5 minutes or 10 minutes for patient sort of relations, more or less, in the real scenario. And if you look at the CT scan, where the brain can be acquired in a second, you still cannot push through more than about 6 patients per hour in the real hospital, because of this, then the necessity to have some decency with the patients. So we have reached this limit that we are now no longer limited so much by the scan time, we're more limited by the rest. And here you can see just 4 of these volunteers out of these 30, a bit more bigger, in a bigger size. Also, EPIMix is also, we also share that since 2018, and we have about 30 sites using it right now. It's a mix between hospitals and universities, but there are mostly hospitals using it for now. And here's a comparison. So I showed earlier that we had 3 papers written now, more or less the same type of paper, where we try to compare diagnostic sort of lesion conspicuity and diagnostic confidence for just radiologists just looking at EPIMix data, and then at another location looking at the full conventional brain MRI exam. And here's just an example. You have a 62-year-old male with a big tumor, and here on the T2 flare, to the left, you can see the T2 flare that belongs to EPIMix, and that portion of EPIMix took 24 seconds. And to the right, you can see a 6.5 minute 3D T2 flare, which is naturally prettier, but you can see more or less the same thing in this case. Another comparison here is that on the top row, you see conventional MRI. On the bottom row, you can see EPIMix. And in the center there, you can see a needle saying that this is with gadolinium injection. So both of these T1 weighted images are with gadolinium. And the bottom row is EPIMix, and since it's EPI, it's also prone to distortions. So at this level of the brain, it's likely to have another shape than the distortion-free conventional images, but the deviation is not so large. It becomes more of a problem lower down in the brain, where you have a lot of tissue air boundaries, and which gives you a lot of bending and distortions on the images. But we have also sort of compared it to CT, and if you think of a quick CT, it's very good for acute workflows. But EPIMix, this is now so fast. And as I said earlier, most of the time in a CT scan is not a CT scan. Most of the time in a CT scan is shipping and handling of the patient. And in EPIMix, we basically can get the same door-to-door time, more or less. For pediatric patients, as many of you may know, or which should know, I think, is that pediatric patients have more water in their head. So we usually get very high signal-to-noise noise, which is good since EPIMix is a fast technique and it's borderline SNR level. And for kids, these fast techniques will go well with this high SNR you get from their brains. If you look at, we have done this is just one table from one of our papers, where we have compared on the columns. At the top, you see routine clinical MRI. To the left, you see EPIMix, and you can see sort of how well do the radiologists rate these how we have scanned a couple of hundred patients in this case. Definitely normal is 19 to the top left, and definitely abnormal 47 cases. And the most important is that you're worried about if you have too many hits on the off diagonal elements here. So you would like to have no false negatives and no false positives. You would like them to stay on this diagonal line. And for the most part, they do. But there are a few exceptions. For instance, the pituitary gland, just below the brain, it's an area where it's hopeless to use EPIMix because it's so much field distortions there. So these are cases where this won't work. So if you compare about 95% sensitivity into say that the patient is abnormal or abnormal, which is a low bar, but we also have a 92% correct disease category for EPIMix. But we also, when we did these studies, we wanted to improve this further, and we got the feedback we got from the radiologist here, were that you also want, they weren't in big need for having distortion-free images for every contrast, but they said that they would like to have a T2 weighted FSE that is distortion-free for reference at least. They also wanted to have high resolution in some cases. So this is where we were basically in 2019, 2020, something. So that was a time when we said, okay, we would need to start from scratch and make a new mix sequence called NeuroMix. But I'm gonna continue that in a sec. But for EPIMix now, there are some uses scenarios we see. First, you can use it, and this is also the ways we have used it at our department, at the hospital. We have used it as a safety net. So if we scan it first in each brain exam, many diagnoses can be made even if the exam needs to be aborted. And we have had quite a few cases, not every week, but there have been, say, once a month or something, where the patient has either crawled out of the scanner or have been screaming and wanted to get out of there. And we're talking adults in this case. And sometimes the only images that have been scanned and have been good. Sometimes we have been able to scan conventional MRI scans, at least in part, and they have been too destroyed due to motion artifacts. So then they have to resort to the EPIMix data. Also for recurring MRI scan, this is something we are thinking about. We have not yet done this so much, but if you have a patient coming back for routine checkups, you may be okay to have a less high resolution or comprehensive scan. And also you can think of screening of patient groups that will require too much resources to allow a routine MRI. The thing though, with very fast scans, just in general, if you allow very fast scan to be done at a hospital, that will give you naturally more scans in a given day. And maybe that's a good thing. If you think of reimbursement, you want to get more as a department, a hospital, you can bill more. But it also means that you need more neuroradiologists, and they are expensive, they have a high salary, and they are hard to find. So that is why we have now also attempted to start to learn ourselves a bit about more deep learning, about deep learning classification. And this is early stage. We haven't published this, and this is still we have passed the labeling stage. But the idea here is that if you have many patients in line and you put them through the system, you get too many images to read from your radiologists. You get a backlog. So today, since Karolinska in Sweden is sort of the last resort for heart patients around the country, we have higher standards when it comes to reading the MRI images. So we always have 2 neuroradiologists that are reading them independently and confirm that the diagnosis is because they can agree on what they see. And that is very time consuming, especially if you have a long list of patients. So the idea here is to have a normal abnormal classifier that looks at the EPIMix data and then can say yes or no for is it abnormal or normal. And if it's no detected pathology, we could think of that you can read the cases later, or you can at least, or maybe you can read, it's enough with one radiologist reading the data, the images. But if you find an abnormal patient, you can highlight that and you can read those patients first. So a little bit, if you think of this as a random list from left to right here, where the red crosses are sort of sick patients or patient with lesions, at least what we can do with the computer, we can at least try to sort this list of hundreds of patients and queued up for the new radiologist so that they can read the abnormal cases first and spend most of their work time on those instead. And this is at Karolinska, we have many, so the very high percentage of sick patients. So this is partly helping, but for a hospital where you want to rule out, for instance, tumors for example, as being the cause for schizophrenia or something, where you have very low likelihood of actually finding a lesion in the brain, this might be even more important. So one option we have thought of is to separate them in 3 classes: normal, abnormal, acute, and abnormal but not acute. Another option could be to have binary classifiers, normal, abnormal, and in the abnormal group, so have a subclass of acute, not acute. So we are currently tinkering around a little bit here, and we hope to, within a few months from now, have a network that can be used at least as a guide. And so far with the normal abnormal, we have preliminary results that we have reached about over 95, 90, 96 something %, sometimes even higher when it comes to this classification. And so just by looking, let the EPIMix data be used as this classifier, for this classifier. And here is the labeling system I wrote, because reading all this, we have read and labeled 2,000 patients, and as neuroradiologists are expensive, they're also expensive labelers. So I've written this MATLAB user interface for quickly have a single click for clicking one slide, and we have selected sort of 6 slides, sick or healthy slides in the brain here. And we can also tag them as faint lesion. We can tag them with degenerative white matter, metal artifact. We can exclude them. The bottom up there for saying, this patient is acute. So this is sort of how we have gone about to label the data. Also, up to this, you now in Swedish up there, but it doesn't matter. We have the full radiology report for all these 2,000 patients. So we know the true answer for the patient in this labeling phase. And as you know, most of you, I guess, is that not all single deviations are pathology. So the orange arrows to the left points at degenerative white matter, which should not be classified as abnormal for if you're old. So that is something we need to make sure we don't flag these patients as abnormal, just because most 80-year-olds do have these white matter changes anyway. And the geometric distortions around the ear canal should not be, so we haven't come to the point where we have confirmed that we have these are not causing a red flag or making a patient to appear having a lesion and so on. But we do want to see the acute stroke. We do want to see the bleeding. We do also want to see the acute bending of the brain, which is an indicator for that the patient has a herniation and something acute is happening to the patient. So these are sort of the desire for us to find. But this deep learning is a new thing for us in our group, and it's a bit of a side project at this point. So now we can come to back to the mainstream for us, which is sort of doing new sequences, new pulse sequences. And Here I show the desire here now to have a bottom more or less to do single brain exam with NeuroMix, which is the successor to EPIMix. The NeuroMix is in addition to what EPIMix could offer, we have replaced the T2 and T2 flare with distortion-free single-shot fast-band echoes. We have a 3D EPI SWI, and we have a 3D T1 and so on. And this sequence now, NeuroMix, is a mix of, in a single scan bottom push, you get different scan planes, and you get a mix of EPI and single-shot fast-band echo, and you get the different matrix sizes. So that is all very sort of unexplored territory when it comes to sorting data and pushing the limits of what's possible programming-wise. So the paper we publish here is shows that within 2.5 minutes we can get these this type of data. And what I want to highlight here is that the additional the 3D SWI takes another 28 seconds, or that is including 228, and a T1 3D takes 23 seconds. If you remove those, the scan time is down to about 1 minute 28, 1:30 or something. So this is for those of you who develop a sequence yourself. This is how we were forced to spend a couple of years now on actually rewriting our framework. So at the very top, very bottom left, you see EPIC, that is the GE's pulse programming environment. On top of that, we have K's foundation, which is our simplification layer I showed earlier. On top of that, we have been forced to have make new sort of design structures, have this sort of notion that the idea of slice timing, repetition time, case properties to make that generic and very sequence independent. And the layer above that is to have, instead of having a pulse sequence on top, you have a pulse sequence generator that generates an API sequence or a fast-band echo sequence or an inversion module or something based on requests from the top. So this becomes, in simple terms, you can think of the sequence at the top here called, in the case NeuroMix, consists of small recipes of one-page designs that are more or less ordered like you order a pizza, more or less, to this layer below, and that will send back a sequence for you. So that in that way, we have become independent of the user interface. We can use or not use the prescribed slices and so on. We are very independent now. We can continue to expand this further, make it everything very inert. I think I'm gonna skip this. This is more or less showing what the order of contrast being played. Maybe we skip that actually, it's not so critical. Here's the slide showing EPIMix at the top and NeuroMix as successor at the bottom. You see at first glance, they are quite similar. What is different is that the first column, T2 flare, is now at the bottom. You see that it's single-shot fast-band echo, so it's distortion-free. The fat is back. And the third column, T2, you have a real T2 now instead of just a B0. And now, again, what you can have on top, instead of just having the EPIMix, you have also now the 3D. So if you spend another 23 seconds, you get the full 3D scan, T1 3D scan. And also for when you prescribe, we recommend prescribing 4mm slices actually. The bottom in B, you see 3 slices out of for the SWI EPI. And if you prescribe 4mm slices, this particular contrast will give you 2mm partitions instead. And the T1 is not played axially, it's played sagittally and so on. A cool thing I would say for those of you who are into sequence development is that we have been very happy with this. For EPI, you need to avoid to excite fat, or you need to have a fat sat pulse in order to avoid the chemical shift of several centimeters of fat. But there's a very nice RF pulse, which you can use just as a rectangular RF pulse. And depending on the duration of that RF pulse, you can get the Fourier transform on that duration or that rect pulse in the spectral domain becomes a sync. And if you have the correct duration, you can get the side lobe of the sync or the null point of the sync pulse in the frequency domain to hit to be around the fat peak at 400 hertz. So this is a sneaky way actually to get rid of fat without having to spend 10 milliseconds on a spectrospatial RF pulse or a chemical SAT pulse or something. And the good news is also that the gray-white matter contrast is much improved. So this has been a good, it's very cheap sequence. It's 23 seconds and it gives you fairly good motor quality, I think. We also compare that with sort of basically an MPH 4-minute scan. The first column is a 4-minute MPH, and the second column is this 3D EPI. Now that to 22 seconds. And you can see that you get fairly bit, and to the right you see that after contrast injection, gadolinium contrast injection, you see that they show pretty much the same lesion. For tumor patients, we have compared standard conventional MRI with EPIMix and NeuroMix. And if you look in C, you can see that in the T1 flare 3D takes 5 minutes, and then you can see the orange arrow there points to the remaining tumor, which is since we still have the T1 flare API in NeuroMix, you see that it's so close to the ear canal, so we can't really see the tumor. But we also have this T1 3D API as a part of NeuroMix. So in there, you can actually have so low distortions, you can see the tumor. And the reason why the 3D API is less distortion than the 2D APIs is because it's multi-shot. So we have either 12 or 16 shots that will reduce the distortions. Here I show a case where we have scanned NeuroMix on a patient, a pediatric patient, where the patient was moving significantly. And here you can see movements of about it's -5 to +10 on the y-axis here. There's more or less 10 to 15 degrees of head motion. And as usual, pitch motion or nodding motion is the most sort of prevalent type of motion. But still, with that kind of motion, we still get good image quality. The 3D sequences in H and I, H is actually the SWI, so SWI is very sensitive to any kind of motion. So neither of these 3D sequences are safe, so are immune to motion. But since they're so quick, you can be lucky, and as you see in I down there, you can be lucky and have no motion really during the time of like these 23 seconds on NeuroMix. And here I just want to show you in the manual, we can just, I want to highlight only that it's simple. You only need to basically worry about the field of view and the slice thickness and number of slices. And then you can click on the advanced page. And here you see the most important stuff. You can see what types of contrast would you like and what types of contrast you want to exclude. And one is yes, please, and no is no. And you can choose, for instance, CV2 there shows you want to have 5 averages for T2 T1 flare. Diffusion at CV5, you can say you want to have 6 diffusion directions. So basically this is something you can, each user or each site can modify the SNR of each contrast to their needs. And here you can see, for instance, if you change for T1 flare API in A in orange, you can see 5, 10, and 20 average. You can see the image quality improves and how much time you spend, 16, 29, and 55 seconds. In diffusion, for NeuroMix, you can see 4, 6, and 20 diffusion directions. So there's nothing right or wrong here. It's just that it's showing the trade-off between time and quality. We can also have a multi-shot T2-weighted FEC. Single shot is the robust workhorse, we think. But to the left here, you see the optional 45-second T2 you can have as a part of NeuroMix. You can extend the NeuroMix by still in one scan button push, but you can extend it by 45 seconds to also get this T2 multi-shot FSC or turbospinnacle, which is sharper, so but not motion robust. So NeuroMix, if you think of NeuroMix for the future and AI, NeuroMix is a better and more complete MR scan than EPIMix. We have less geometric distortions, therefore visible structures in the basal part of the brain. And we now gonna do real-time motion correction as well with this. So we can get data consistency between the channels, and the channels here are different contrasts. So we hope that could minimize the false positive negatives from the deep learning network when the patient moves. Normal, abnormal, acute, non-acute classifiers still our probably main interest, but we're still in the learning phase here. We're still a bit behind other people in deep learning MRI now, but we also think of having units making sort of hot maps of suspicious regions. So highlight areas in the brain that are suspicious to the neuroradiologist. Lastly, I'm going to spend 5 minutes on head motion, which is sort of one of our favorite topics. So we know that head motion is costly, and I can show, I think here is a famous paper from Jalal Andre showing that head motion in the clinical care costs about $100,000 per MR scanner per year. If you're considering that you need to rescan, you need to reschedule, and some of these have to come back with anesthesia and so on. To the right, you see times for MR anesthesia, pediatric MRI under anesthesia. The top histogram with 3 panels showing the time it takes to sedate a child is an average half an hour. The MRI time is about 45 minutes. And the post-MRI time, which is the wake-up time for the kid, is 15 minutes or something. And they all add together, obviously, for the full exam. At the bottom right, you see the waiting time for the pediatric brain MRI at Karolinska. Most of the patients do get an MRI within 3 months, but there are outliers that have to wait 1.5 years for a brain MRI. Here is to the left, we see how imaging can look without the motion correction. And to the right, you can see EPIMix, and this is without any real-time correction now. So you can see that, if I play it again, you can see how these single shot techniques, the snapshot EPI and single shot pathology, can be used to freeze motion. So we are relying, when we're doing this, a lot on single shot pathology, single shot EPI, and also propeller imaging. So we have 2 devices. One we bought from Track Innovations in Denmark, a startup company, which uses a 3D camera, an infrared scatter light on the face, and from that getting a 3D shell over the face, and from that figure out the head motion in real time. About 10 times per second, if we can feed back to the acquisition with the feedback loop. This RAD is an alternative. To the right, you see the device in yellow, which is a minion encapsulating a circuit board that Adam van Niekerk in my group has developed. This is a homemade device that can feedback motion updates within about 5 millisecond latency and about 100 times per second. So here is just an example of how this kid is a volunteer from the CEO of the company. This is not the patient. And here just show that Tracolene system in action. And you can see also how it tracks the head motion here. Our device, which we have made in our group, credits to Adam van Niekerk again here, is the device you put on the forehead, either with a padding or a plate or no plate. And then it sends out Wi-Fi, homemade Wi-Fi to a receiver, which is fed back to the acquisition process in the equipment room. So basically like this, you have a receiver, and then you have an Ethernet cable running back in the back, and then it adjusts the field of view in real time. So we have written a few papers on these techniques, on sequences and on these devices, and now we have made a 50-minute protocol using these devices and our homemade sequences. And with those, we have now scanned, I think, 17 patients, pediatric patients. And here to the top left, you see motion patterns for the child to the right, you can see in the MRI images, and which moved about 35 degrees in the nodding direction, in the pitch direction during this time. You can see the time is 25 minutes. And despite that, with the combination of prospective correction, using this case, the tracking system, and to have single shot techniques like, or at least propeller techniques in this case, we can get very sharp images. So using this combination, we were able to get 15 out of 16 children scanned in the MR scanner and got diagnostic results. And these kids were all scheduled for an MRI and anesthesia in clinical care. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much again, Dr. Skare, for this great talk. And we now move to the Q&A phase. I'd just like to remind the audience to please address your question using the Q&A, chat, or just raise your virtual hand. And I saw the first question in the chat asking, how do you avoid ghosting in the 3D API due to B0 fluctuations from breathing, motion, etc.?
Yeah, so the B0 fluctuations are really tough for 3D MRI in general, especially when you have nodding, when you're breaking the field lines and so on. The 3D API is, I guess, no exception. The thing with 3D API is that just because you can be lucky, the 23 seconds is so short. So we have seen that in most cases, you just miss the time when they're moving. But in maybe, if I would guess, say a quarter of the cases, they also get destroyed and so on. But since if you think of a normal 3D scan, T1, it usually takes a few minutes, and then it's much easier to get hit by motion.
Great, thank you. Another question is, you've demonstrated the use of NeuroMix and EPIMix for those 5 mainly used, let's say, contrast mechanism. Can you imagine, or are you working on expanding it to other contrast mechanism, magnetization transfer, for example, or any other purpose?
Yeah, so we are employed, 4 of us are employed by the hospital doing research, although we have hospital salaries. The things we want to do is what radiologists need, more so than what's maybe interested from a sort of research point of view in terms of when you choose contrast. What I would say is that magnetization transfer would not be high on the list. I would rather say that we probably need to do MR angiography. Would be something that would be needed for stroke. If you're going to replace stroke, we have CT stroke in our acute workflow. If you're going to do NeuroMix stroke, we would need a time of flight angiography or something like that. Great. We are going to replace also the T1 flare API with T1 flare propeller. So we're going to get 3 of these contrast distortion free.
Awesome. A technical question. Do you have any plans to expand it to additional vendors, the technique, or to allow it to be used on other vendors?
So I'm getting old. So I am 28 years down the road with GE. It's going to be hard for me to change. Also, we have only GE scanners at Radiology. And thirdly, if you have deep collaboration with a vendor, it's not easy to have a clinical scientist from one vendor and then sort of have deep contract with someone else. That is usually very hard to do.
Sure. And maybe one last questions. After all those very nice, let's say, new methods you presented, I'm wondering, where do you see, like, what's the limit? What is it in the horizons of fast MRI? How fast can we go? What's next?
Well, I didn't say that so much, but I think what we have done now is one part of this is to squeeze down the time for each contrast. We say we want to have a certain number of contrasts, and in order to suit everybody's need, we have this smorgasbord at the advanced page. You can pick and choose. That is one part of it. But what is very rarely talked about in science, I would say, or in papers, is the non-scan time. That is the time for clicking around as a MR tech, time for pressing download and then get the pre-scan, or I think it's even called tuning. This time and calibration and all that takes time. For NeuroMix, that would have taken more than twice the time than the scan itself. And this is rarely talked about. So I think we would like to hammer now on the single scan button push as being a way to reduce, maybe in our case, 2 minutes of the non-scan time. You prescribe once and we get different slice orientation, we get different contrast, we swap the phase frequency and coding direction, and so on. And that is sort of a hidden time.
Great. So that's a really refreshing perspective. So awesome. Thank you for that. And I think I'm going to conclude with that. And thank you again so much, Dr. Skare, for sharing your presentation with us and your thoughts. And thank you everyone for joining. And we hope to see you next time in person.
Thank you so much. Good to be here. Thank you.